The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Office 365, migrating from Office 365 dedicated to multi-tenant. This is Danny Ryan speaking. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for ThreeWill, and I'm fortunate enough to have Kirk Liemohn here with me. Kirk is a Principal Software Engineer from ThreeWill, and he's here to share with us on this important topic. Thanks for joining.
Sure, glad to be here.
You betcha, you betcha. So tell me a little bit about what Principal Software Engineer, what's your role at ThreeWill, just so you can give folks a little bit of a background.
Sure, so I play a role, I help out with sales, of course, but I also am very involved in projects. I'll spend most of my time on projects, so I'll play the role of an architect, team lead, developer, all the above, Scrum Master sometimes. But a lot of times it's architecture, design, and then helping to run the team as well.
So since we're covering Office 365, as far as technology, it sounds like, so that's one of the technologies that you cover along with a bunch of others?
That's right. So Office 365, especially SharePoint Online, also Azure, and then SharePoint On-Prem as well.
Great, great. So let's maybe before we jump into this, we're talking about Office 365 dedicated versus Office 365 multi-tenant. Tell me, what's Office 365 dedicated? What does that mean to me?
Sure, it's really, I think, considered SharePoint Online as is multi-tenant, and basically Microsoft hosts SharePoint in the cloud as they do with multi-tenant, but multi-tenant means that there's multiple tenants or companies basically using the same farm, really, so sharing the services. Whereas in dedicated, they do not share farms or share services.
Great. We'll probably get a little bit more into this. So we'll get more into sort of the differences between the two maybe in a little bit here, but that's great just as far as an overview. We've had also come into the room Pete Skelly. Pete Skelly is our Director of Technology. Thanks, Pete, for joining us.
Thanks, no problem.
He's going to take some backup questions. If there's anything Kirk wants to punt the ball to for Pete, he'll throw it back to Pete, and hopefully Pete will answer. So thanks for joining us, Pete.
Yeah, no problem.
So we wanted to focus this webinar on a particular project that we've done that we think is pretty interesting for people who are on Office 365 dedicated, which is we're talking about 60, 70.
It's a small number, yep.
Customers.
Nothing compared to the multi-tenant.
Nothing compared. So these are really large companies that are on dedicated
for the most part, yeah.
And so tell me a little bit more about this project. Of course, we don't want to let anybody know about exactly who the client is or any of the specifics of that, but just generalize the nature of the client and sort of how they're set up as an organization.
Sure, they're a large multinational company, and they have several business units, or really sub-companies, if you will, that are sharing the same dedicated instance out there. Mm-hmm. And they're going to move separately into SharePoint Online multi-tenant. So several, they're going to have their different tracks. I think all of them are going to be going to multi-tenant, but potentially at different times, or definitely at different times. And we're managing one of them right now. And there's a lot more when you talk about Office 365. There's a lot more than just SharePoint. We're focusing on the SharePoint piece. There's also others that are focusing on the Exchange piece, and others on the Link or the Skype for Business piece.
Okay, so I guess for the purpose of this webinar, we're really going to focus in on the SharePoint piece of this, which is what we're brought into. And I understand that the Exchange piece was done by another organization, and also I guess the Link part that was done by another organization as well.
And then there's interdependencies for sure. So we need those Azure AD accounts to be over there before we do our piece. So it definitely matters, but for the most part, they're separate pieces of work that are going
Does the Exchange stuff go first, or what? Like sort of
at least the Azure AD piece has to go first, and I believe all of the Exchange is going to be completed before we start. And I see Pete nodding his head, yes.
Yes, we have acknowledgement in the back of the room. That's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about, and I know we're pretty early on in the project, but I still wanted to, I think there's a lot of stuff that's happened up to this point that I want to share with other folks. Let's talk about the reason why move off of dedicated.
Sure.
What was the thought there?
Well, the primary driver is cost related. So, SharePoint Online multi-tenants, you see a lot of companies going there, big and small, and down to one-person companies, for example. And the reason is because it's quite cheap, if you look at the costs involved. And of course, there's different plans in there, and they have different costs. And then dedicated has substantially higher costs. And when you start adding up the number of users in these larger companies, then that's something you definitely got to pay attention to. Is it worth it to you to stay in the dedicated environment, or would you rather have the lower cost option? And there are some benefits of the dedicated environment, but there's pros and cons. So for example, if you want to have stuff that doesn't change as often, you might want to stay in dedicated. But if you want the latest features, those are going out to the multi-tenant environment before they're going out to SharePoint on-premises environments, before they're being deployed to the on-premises builds. But there's going to be a vNext in dedicated, and my understanding is those will start to get the features a little quicker than in the past. But still, the multi-tenant's going to be getting the features first.
So the next generation of dedicated is called vNext.
Yeah, I don't know if that's an internal name or not. I don't think anyone's on it yet. But that's my understanding is there's a dedicated environment. Everyone that's in dedicated that stays there is going to be moved to the vNext by Microsoft. You can choose to stay in that, or you can choose to move to multi-tenant.
Now, I know sort of at the evolution of SharePoint, one of the things that we've been talking through the years is sort of the move from full trust code over to farm, over to sort of cloud-based stuff. Is what in the dedicated environment can you run like full trust code or farm-based solutions, or? It's
a great question. So in the current dedicated environment, you can, and there's a big asterisk next to that, you have to go through a process called an MSO CAF process of getting things approved to go into the farm solutions. They are not installed by you, they're installed by Microsoft. You have to have a high-level design around this, and they have to get the approval, and we've certainly seen that approval fail for certain things. So if you need any third-party tools installed that do farm solutions or run anything directly on the server, say a PowerShell script, that requires this approval process, and that can take time. We're talking weeks easily, and so you got to plan for that, and it can be they can reject it. Once you move to vNext, my understanding is that option will no longer be there, so it's going to be just like that multi-tenant option today.
So it's going to be basically cloud-based solutions.
Right. It's going to be the whole app. The 2013 app model applies. And of course, what's in multi-tenant today is closer to 2016, but it's still that same app model applies. You would use that. You'd use maybe the patterns and practices for things like provisioning, but you would not be using farm solutions. And you can't do it in multi-tenant today. You will not be doing it in dedicated once it goes to the vNext.
So what happens to those full trust / farm-based solutions when you move to vNext?
They will not go. You have to rebuild them if you still need that functionality, and you have to do it in the newer architecture.
Interesting. Very interesting. So tell me, with the decision to move, how were we involved in that process? How did we help with making a decision?
So we were definitely involved in the process, and so there were lots of options on the table. There was, stay where we are and then go to vNext, and what does that mean for us? Or move to multi-tenant. One was, do we move to multi-tenant and have multiple tenants in the multi-tenant environment, maybe one per region? So we could have one for Asia, maybe one for Australia, maybe one for North America. And we looked at that option. That one breaks down pretty quick, and Microsoft discourages that, is my understanding, and I discourage it as well. The way it breaks down is in several areas, and primarily revolves around external users. So imagine if you have a tenant in North America and a tenant in Australia, and your company has those two, and you're a user in North America, but you're an external user to the Australia tenant, and you have access to it because someone's invited you maybe to an area, but they have to invite you. For them to invite you, they can't use the look ahead on the people picker,
okay,
or the controls when you're inviting people. They have to type in your email address, and you'll be an external user, not an internal, and they're second-class citizens. They have a lot of capabilities. I think that's great, but they are second-class citizens. So last I checked, certain things like Power BI, Delve, the video portal, Office 365 groups, those things do not work for external users. And I'm sure there's more, and as new features come along, those new features may not apply to external users. So anytime you separate things out into multiple tenants, mainly maybe per region, you have got potential issues when it goes, because you're dealing with external users, unless you give everyone multiple accounts, but then they got to manage those, and of course you got a bigger cost.
Yeah, pay for the cost for the accounts as well. Yeah.
Right. So it's not ideal. Other things that kind of factor into that decision. Well, other things to think about, I guess, is with 2016, if you want to keep some on-prem, maybe you've got some dedicated or on-prem farms, say, even if you have dedicated, maybe you got some on-prem as well. There's a much better story now when it comes to search. So you can have your index, your SharePoint 2016 on-prem index consumed by SharePoint Online. And then so you can be doing a search in SharePoint Online, and it'll find your on-prem content. And that's a lot better hybrid story than we've had in the past from a search standpoint. So I think that's great. Another thing to think about would be ExpressRoute, which will just basically give your location or your sites a fast pipe straight to Office 365 through certain vendors. I don't know who all they are, but like AT&T or Comcast, like that. And just another thing to mention there is if you look, when I talked about these different regions, if you look at that, there's some online data maps you can find out there that Office 365 publishes, and they're a little confusing because they'll show things like, well, the South America region uses a data center in North America for SharePoint Online. I believe that's the case, but not for Dynamic CRM. They'll use something in Brazil for that, and it's a little bit fuzzy when you start looking at the different regions. So pay attention to that if you're thinking, oh, what region are we going to use? Because you do get to choose only one region for your tenant, and what does it mean? Where's the data really residing? So, but other things to think about are like if you do have concerns with keeping your data within a certain country for the data laws of that country, say Germany, then Microsoft might say that, hey, we've got this covered. We're good to go with that. But if you disagree, then you can still have your on-prem farm, host it in the country of choice, and then if you can do just like SharePoint 2016, you can still do some of that search indexing, maybe, if that's allowed by your data laws.
Interesting. So it sounds like so for the data for folks, when we have listeners who are, it's called Safe Harbor, I think. Yeah, for those laws, because we do have listeners right now who are from over in Europe. So you would do something where you would have like an on-premise SharePoint that would have the localized data there, but then you could run the SharePoint Online and have the two of them talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the hybrid solution story is getting better. It's really before it was BCS, search, and then one other one, which was kind of a corner case, and I forget what it was. Something with SAP, I think. And the search one has gotten better, and it can work both directions. But the new way it's getting better, as I mentioned, is the index can be ingested by SharePoint Online. Now that may not work with your safe harbor rules, but that would be a nice way to kind of integrate the two.
Great. So it sounds like in discussing whether to make the move or not make the move, that there was a point in which you said, okay, and we decided to go, let me see if I get this straight. We didn't do multiple tenants. We did
Correct.
one tenant, and this is for the whole this is for the entire company.
Well, yeah, as I said initially, this company is really a conglomeration of companies, and the kind of the head unit is moving. We're helping them move to from multi-tenant from dedicated to multi-tenant. And there are other sub-companies, if you will, that are going to be moving separately.
Okay.
And so they will have their own tenants. And so there will be, and they have, they've been working together in some of these site collections. So now when they are in these different tenants, there will be external users, and they're going to have to worry about how they're going to invite those external users and make them part of the family again for certain site collections.
Yeah.
So there's definitely going to be some pain there.
Okay. And then, so we've made it sounds like the decision was made. It was primarily probably made off of the cost benefit, looking at what you're getting with what you have with dedicated versus what you get in the multi-tenant environment. It sounds like there's some pros and cons of each option.
Yeah, when we gave them a big spreadsheet showing a bunch of all these features or decision points, and kind of scored them in the different choices, and rolled up those weighted, basically, some things matter more than others, so we weighted cost more than certain things, and so VNext was not out of the picture, but multi-tenant was their decision.
Mm-hmm. And as you were looking at this, were there tools? Let's talk maybe a little bit right now about tools involved
Mm-hmm.
with this. We're talking about a pretty significant size migration. Did we help with the selection of the tools that were going to be used? Tell me a little bit more about that whole process.
Yeah, so there, yes, we did help, and there are several tools, obviously. So what we did is we looked at all the tools, or a lot of the tools out there that are for migrations, and we quickly narrowed it down to a couple of them based on our needs. So everyone's needs are different. In this case, the requirement was we want to do a lift and shift of site collections. So we want to take a large number of site collections, not a small number, and move them from one environment to another, and keep them working as close to the same as they were before, with as little degradation of features as possible. And so we're looking at that specific use case and understanding that our source environment was a SharePoint Online dedicated, and our target is SharePoint Online multi-tenant. That helped us narrow down those tools. The fact that it's a large number, we knew we had to orchestrate this with PowerShell. Yeah. And so that probably removed a tool or two from our choice list. We got it down to 2 tools, and then we created 2 or 3 dozen use cases that were important to us. An obvious use case would be just get my list and library content over there and my subsites. But outside of that, then there's, do you care about workflow, info path, manage metadata? It can go on and on and on. And we have, as I said, 2 or 3 dozen. I think it's actually, I want to say it's up to 70 now, but a lot of use cases where we were looked at initially between these 2 tools. And then we made the tool choice, and that helped us make the tool choice, obviously. Okay. So, and so that was a big part of it. We just need to, I just want to emphasize the fact that every project is different. Your requirements are different. So anyone's tool choice could be different than our tool choice.
And that's, I guess, sort of our philosophy is more of, let's not say you have to use this tool when you work with us. It's more of, let's help you make the decision around the tool, and probably get some help from the tool vendor himself. Sure. for implementing it. But in the end, try to make the best decision for the customer, not just whoever we recommend based upon our past experience.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had past experience with both final tools, and so I don't think that influenced it.
And you also looked at a tool that was sort of taking a look at the environments.
Yeah, that's a good
point. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so there's at least one tool out there that'll kind of catalog your current environment and help you make decisions around moving. And we kind of wanted to use this tool, but I talked about how if if you want to install a farm solution in the dedicated environment, it has to go through this approval process. And they ran into that problem. They had not had it approved yet. We worked with them to try and get it approved, and we could not get it approved.
Frustrating.
But definitely something to consider, especially for an on-premises location. If you're going from on-prem to Office 365 multi-tenant, then yeah, there's tools out there that can help you kind of catalog what you've got. Things like how many sites have workflows or have InfoPath. It can tell you those types of things, and it's a lot of information it can tell you.
Is the plan to pull everything over, or is there a plan to sort of look at stuff and leave some, recognizing that some stuff maybe needs to be archived, or is really just a past history of something?
Yeah, we discussed that, and in our case, we are moving everything over for this business unit, except for my sites. We've decided not to do my sites. There was not heavy use of my sites. There's a very large number of them, however, but they're all very tiny. Many of them have very little data, so we've chosen not to do my sites.
Interesting. So where are you, I guess, backing off from this whole thing, where are you as far as the process of making this migration? I know this is a big project for us. So what sort of are we halfway there? Are we 1/3 way there? Where are we with this?
Yeah, well, our analysis started, I think, way earlier this year, like probably February timeframe. But what we're doing now is we're going through and getting ready for pilot. So pilot's going to start at the end of next month, and during our pilot, we want to actually move probably several hundred site collections and learn from that experience in this environment. So to be prepared for that, we need to understand what are the issues we're going to run against. So what are the gaps that the tool can and cannot handle, and then we've got to mitigate those and handle them. So we can either mitigate those by communication, so just communicating to site owners or users and saying, hey, this is an issue, maybe it's an issue specific to your site. We know that you've got this type of feature in your site and it's not supported in migrating. Running workflows is an example. Anytime a workflow is running, it cannot be migrated to Office 365. So until Microsoft changes some API. And so we're going to be watching running workflows, and if there are still some running, we'll probably not run those at that time until we get to a point where we've told people they've got to stop their workflows so we can run them, or they're just going to get that data over. The other things besides communication, we can write code ourselves that does CSOM type code to SharePoint Online Multi-Tenant that will maybe do some fix-up afterwards of certain things, and we found several cases that tool doesn't handle right now that we can do.
Tell me what CSOM means. What is that?
Client-side object model. It's just it's the only way you program against. Well, it's not the only. You can do REST or CSOM against SharePoint Online. So it's just your code runs in on a client, not on the server. It's not a farm solution. It can run in a browser as JavaScript. It can also run in PowerShell or in a console app written in C#, for example.
Okay, cool. And
so that's another way of mitigating or working around or solving issues. An example there might be, in our case, regional settings are not going over with our tool. So we're going to be doing that with CSOM.
Okay.
Another way might be, in certain cases, we might be implementing some server-side code on the dedicated environment, getting the MSO CAF approval, going through that approval process. And an example of that is we want to set some of our sites to read-only when we're doing the migration, because we're not planning on doing incrementals for all of our sites.
Okay.
And so you would think you could turn them as read-only using CSOM, which you can actually do in SharePoint Online Multi-Tenant, but you cannot do in SharePoint Online Dedicated or in SharePoint 2013 until you run a PowerShell script on your server, which is something we also cannot do out of the box. So we're going to write a farm solution to handle, in this case, the read-only aspect. It's also going to help with detecting running workflows as well. So we know at any time we can just call a web service and say what workflows are running. I think that's, we're updating, we're kind of taking inventory of the site collections we're moving.
Okay.
And we've got a process where we can run something maybe once a day or once a week to find out where things are, and that'll help us understand what we should be focusing on. For example, if there's an issue with a certain feature moving over, but nobody makes use of that feature, then we don't really care about it. Or if it's only 4 site collections, then we're just going to deal with that manually. So there are going to be certainly some manual fixes that we're going to have to do versus automated. And we expect a lot of those around branding, but there's going to be others as well. And so we're paying attention to these test cases that don't pass with the tool, and then deciding what track to go based on how severe it is within the environment.
So these aren't real technical questions. Of course, probably none of my questions are real technical, but pilot, how did you decide who goes into the pilot, that group of people who first make the move?
Well, Pete may want to chime in, but I'll just mention that we're in the process of that right now. And
okay.
The client is going to be involved. And there's definitely a process for kind of trying to take a mix of site collections.
Okay.
And that mix could involve the size of the site collection, and then a complexity, which there's several things that go into the complexity, and maybe some other things. Pete, I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah, we're still sort of in process. You asked earlier about where we are overall in the process, and so we're early on knocking off some of the kind of issues and challenges. And so right now we're trying to figure out some of the criteria. So Kirk mentioned things like total size of a site collection. What if there are running workflows? Do we want to identify something that's business critical? So if we know that there's a high read volume of data, or if there's a high write volume of data, we don't want to obviously process something that's going to be doing something at month end if it's a financial site, some things like that. So right now we're trying to figure out, for lack of a better way to put it, an algorithm that will kind of load balance, if you will, overall speed and amount of data, and kind of batch those site collections. Since there is a significant number of them, over time we could batch those up and actually kind of reduce the remediation load and kind of load balance or level out that remediation need.
Very cool. And I know Kirk, you mentioned communication earlier, and that just seems so critical with this project because you're trying to move a large group of people from one place to another place. Now, how are you communicating out to that group of people, and are we helping with sort of how you're communicating what's going to go on out to that group of people?
Well, so in terms of when you move, we are, and I mentioned we've got this inventory of the sites that we're moving. All the site owners are going to have access to this. It's actually a SharePoint list.
Okay.
And when they
that's novel. Use SharePoint.
Yeah, we're using SharePoint to move SharePoint, and
very meta.
Yeah, how meta of you guys. Nice.
So those site owners, they don't go out to it now, but when we're ready for them to, they can go out to this list, and it'll be filtered to just those sites that they are site owners of, and that's already set up, and our scripts have made sure that's set up. So that's just using a regular old filter, and using the people picker field, multi-value people picker field. So that's part of it. There's going to be definitely communications that go out, and with our client, they have specific requirements around how those communications go out. So they're going to be in charge of that, and we're going to be guiding them in terms of here's the things we think that need to go out and when, and the type of thing that needs to be said, and then they're going to be, actually making that communication happen. But the team we work with, we're working with them closely every day. So at the client, and we use Scrum as our process.
Okay, good. So you're getting into the process that was one of the next questions I wanted to hit, is how is this different? So we're typically building apps for people, and this is a little different doing a migration. How is the process changed?
Right. So we do a lot, several migrations, and we do have a process that we follow for migrations that's really, it's similar to our other app dev processes in certain ways, but migrations are, they have kind of a lot more knowns in terms of the types of tasks that have to be done. And so we've already got a lot of those steps laid out. And so, but we still do Scrum around that process. So we know there's going to be, with a migration, we know there's going to be analysis, there's going to be POCs and pilots, there's going to be some, for everything that's migrated, there's going to be pre-migration, migration, and post-migration work. But when it comes to the overall process, we are using Scrum. We have our daily stand-ups. We're doing 2-week sprints. The client is involved in our daily stand-ups, and that's critical. In every project I've been on, if the more the client is involved, the more successful we can be, because we're going to be more in tune with them. They're going to be more in tune with us.
So is there do you have like a product owner or somebody who acts as the product owner?
Yes, yeah, and we've got stakeholders, of course, as well. And so we've got, from the client, we've got usually 2 or 3 people that are on the daily calls, and then we'll have a couple more that are on the sprint reviews. So they're going to stay in tune with what our project is doing, and they are involved in doing some of the work as well. So.
It seems like with this, you guys this is all about managing risk as well, with trying to figure out how do we address the most things that will stop us from making this migration, that you're really trying to think almost on a daily basis about what's the risks that are out there.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. One of the things that we do routinely on projects like this is a weekly review of the product backlog. So any of the things that are in progress or things that might be coming up in the next sprint, or even further out if they do have risk around them. Risks themselves, and then specific to this project, there were a lot of things that we wanted to, because of the velocity we have to have to get this accomplished in the time frame they're looking for. We had a lot of decisions we wanted to track, so we specifically created an additional list within SharePoint inside our project extranet to actually track those lists, or decisions, excuse me, and sort of let us kind of gauge proposed dates where we needed that decision by, and then we'll review those weekly with the project stakeholders to say, what are those decisions, what's the cadence that we want on kind of making that decision, if we're waiting on someone else in the organization, or if we have dependencies that we just want to track and make sure we're reviewing on a weekly basis.
So you're calling out to them specifically what questions need to be answered, a time frame, and then the impact if they're not answered by that.
Yeah, exactly. A perfect example is we mentioned my sites. So because of the volume of sites and the volume of data, one of the things that we wanted to decide very early on was, are we going to migrate my sites? And so we had several conversations, and due to some information that came up recently, we actually decided that my sites are out. So that decision is tracked, the date that decision was made, the stakeholder who made it. So we're not churning as a team. We can go back and just look at the completed list of decisions to say, what was that decision? Are we going to migrate running workflows? Are we going to notify a user for running workflows? What are we going to do around topic X? So really trying to keep those front and center with both the client and the team overall, so that we're not rehashing those things, because this is such a large project.
You were talking about deadlines earlier. Is there like a drop dead date that they have to be off of their dedicated environment, and so that you're sort of working
There's a renewal date.
There's a renewal date.
And if they don't meet that date, then they're going to be paying for another year, is my understanding.
Another year, okay.
So yes.
That's the motivation for everyone. There's a line.
The date is not changing.
There's a line that will not be crossed. Excellent. So what has been the involvement from the client? I know you were talking here about questions that need to be answered. Tell me more about how we're working together with them.
Yeah, well, they are involved on our daily meetings, which to me is the most important part. And so they hear what we're going through, and we can hear what they're doing as well related to the project. And so that it just really helps, because then that's when we might say, you know what, and I need your help in this area, and then they'll go off and help us. So that's the main part. We do use our extranet, and they do hit that extranet. We're uploading and downloading files from there all the time. For collaboration, we're putting in some facts from some other documents and wikis, in there because we got to have all this communication that goes out for certain things. So we're starting to put that there, and then they're going to start reviewing that.
And they're pretty active on our extranet.
One or two people are, yes, and that's good. And then the sprint reviews, we're getting some stakeholders and others in there, so they get to see the status. We're reporting kind of how our progress is going for certain things, like the decisions list, as Pete mentioned, but also just how is our remediation going of certain issues we're migrating. Are all our test cases, are they tested? And of those that are tested, which ones are having issues? And of those issues, which of those have been remediated by now? Or at least have we done a spike around it to understand if, yes, we can remediate it through, say, automated CSOM calls.
Very cool. Well, let's get to some wrap-up questions here. If you had 2 or 3 takeaways, sort of, or maybe bits of advice that you would give somebody looking into this, besides contact 3 Will, what would you share with them as far as what looking into taking on a venture like this? What would you share?
Well, there's might be hard to put down 2 or 3. We'll see, but
or you can have 4 or 5. Okay. I'll give you 4 or 5. Go ahead.
So, to me, the first one is you need to know your environment. So if you have a very large environment you're moving, of course we're focusing here on SharePoint, it can be hard to know the details of it, but you need to understand the limitations of where you're coming from and where you're going to. In our case, it's dedicated to multi-tenant. We had a lot of limitations there, and there's limitations what the tools can do as well. They're limited in certain ways because of the APIs. And those would occur from multi-tenant to multi-tenant as well, or anything to multi-tenant. You're going to have some of those. You can't do a database attached type of thing. But so that's probably the first one. The other one I've already mentioned, external users. So if you're using external users in your current environment, you need to think about how those translate over to your new environment. So in our case, we were going from dedicated to multi-tenant. Our external users, they have a lot of them. And those external users are really still domain accounts. I think they have a separate Active Directory for these users than their regular users, but they're in an AD domain. And as far as SharePoint, SharePoint Online Dedicated is really basically SharePoint on-prem 2013, hosted by Microsoft, and they're basically first-class citizens in that environment. External users in SharePoint Online Multi-Tenant are different, and they're not. I would not consider them first-class citizens. I think they're very close. They're business class maybe, but there are those issues, and migrating those, you got to think about what does it mean to migrate those.
Are they still in Active Directory, or are they?
Well, everything. I think every user is going to be they're in Azure Active Directory. The external users, it's just a link to them because they might be a Microsoft account or a live organizational account. So there's
not necessarily there's.
Yeah, I don't think they are, but certainly SharePoint knows about them. And in fact, the tenant, the Office 365, I think has an external users section that it knows about them.
Okay.
So they're not just a SharePoint thing, although I think only SharePoint uses them right now. So external users is another big one. Think about how you're going to communicate to all these users, your external users, site admins, other members. Think about the features you currently use, and are those features supported in multi-tenant? If that's where you're moving, can you move those features over there? Think about what it takes to move those. You may want to test those with a tool of choice. Think about the type of move you're doing. Are you doing, in our case, I mentioned a lift and shift of site collections. So a lot of people that's not what they want to do. They might want to take this time to reorganize their content. Yeah. They may want to start making use of the video portal in multi-tenant, and maybe they're on-prem or in dedicated, and they don't have a concept of a video portal. Maybe they want to start moving their videos over there and make use of that. So there's different ways of moving, and one size does not fit all. So another one is consider Azure to run that move for you. So in our case, we are using Azure because to run our migration software, and that's going to help that is what's going to be moving the data, and the reason we think that's a good choice is it's closest to the data. So we're going from SharePoint Online dedicated to SharePoint Online multi-tenant. So the data lives relatively close to Azure, and it should be in these data centers. So
do we know if it's crossing to another data center, or do we have any idea about?
We do not believe so. We do not believe so.
Okay, so it's staying in the same, most likely staying in the same data
Yeah,
center.
I don't know. I'm sure they got some barriers there or something, but it's going to be closer than, say, trying to run it out of an office from the headquarters.
At the very least, you're on Microsoft's backbone.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So you're probably not in the same data center, and there really is no way to tell definitively where your data is. Microsoft won't release that. They will if you call and kind of prove who you are, et cetera, but they're not going to tell everybody where their data is. So.
And also the nice thing about Azure is you can ramp up, as everyone knows, doing with IaaS or which is what this is. We're running VMs. So right now we're running a couple of migration servers, and we're ready to ramp up to 8 migration servers.
So the migration tool we chose, we're running that tool on Azure.
Yes.
Okay.
Gotcha. And then we've written PowerShell scripts that are orchestrating that tool to tell it to do its job.
Cool. You have one more if you want to do one more.
Okay, I'll do one more.
One more, and that's it.
Throttling is something to think about and something we're concerned about. So in the SharePoint Online multi-tenant world, Microsoft knows that you are sharing the hardware with other tenants. That's why it's multi-tenant. And so they do not want you to hog the resources of that hardware, which means your I/O requests, your database requests, all that stuff. So they are monitoring how quickly you're doing this, and they will not tell us the algorithm. I wish they would, but if you hit some threshold, they're going to start to throttle you, and they're going to give you back what's called a HTTP 429, which basically says, we're a little too busy right now to handle your requests. Try again later. You want your tool of choice to be able to handle that, number one, and you want to be aware when it's happening. You don't want to try and overload the tool and say, oh, okay, let's just keep throwing in. We want to try and do 80 site collections at once. Well, if your environment's getting throttled, then that may not be a smart move. And you want to think about tactics to overcome throttling, maybe using different user accounts to access it. And you can be coming from separate servers maybe, but that may not help the throttling aspect. So you want to pay attention to that and watch out for it. Now, it's going to be hard to detect until you do some real-world tests with real-world data and a lot of it at once.
Last question. I'll hurl a softball pitch at you. It's very self-serving, extremely self-serving, which is why is 3Will the right partner for this type of project?
Yeah, and I could go on about past experience with migrations and stuff, but for me, the big one is what we do on all our projects, which is we put our customer first. We are not beholden to the tool vendor, to Microsoft, to anyone. We want to do what's right for the customer. So we want to look at your situation. We know you're unique, and we know your needs are unique. Now, you may have some similarities with other clients that we've worked with in the past, but we want to look at those and understand them, and then help you make the right decision on how to move forward. And that's our goal. It's not to get you more, get more licenses of X.
Cool. Anything you'd add to that, Pete, at all?
I think that says it perfectly.
Awesome. Well, I definitely want to have you guys back towards the end of the project, just to give a sort of a report and give us an update as far as things that you've learned since towards the end of the project, and just hear about things. I want to hear whether you're going to make your date or not. No, just have you back just to share more, because I think this was very helpful just to give people an idea of what things to start thinking about. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. I know you guys are extremely busy right now, so thanks for taking the time out of the project to come and share with folks in the community about this. For everyone listening, I am recording this, so if you wanted to share this with some colleagues, just check out there'll be actually an email that's sent out to you early next week, which will have a link to the video, and feel free to share that with other folks who you think might be interested in this. I think that's it for all. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us on this webinar. You can always find out about more upcoming events if you go to our calendar on our website, threewheel.com/calendar. And we're just starting to think about events for next year. If you guys have some ideas about things that we should cover, I'm always interested in that. I think this year we've had some great topics go by and excited about what we were presenting. Next year, I might start focusing in on some of the partners we're working with and sharing a little bit more about some of the different tools that we use and just a little bit more about specifics on projects and just getting people to learn more about what's out there. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.